Mm-hmm.
But the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to men's rights advocates if you want to know what they have to say.
Hello and welcome to Honey Badger Radio. I'm your host, Alison and with me is Brian Martinez. And today we're doing another installment of HBR Debate on Tucker Carlson's newest series on men's issues. And his first guest in his first installment is Jordan Peterson. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go through and pick out what we consider to be the 5 most interesting statements and then have a discussion on them. And then if we need to round out the hour or the 1.5 hours, we'll continue with a few runners-up statements that we've chosen about this particular installment. Okay, Brian.
Yep.
Are you ready to go?
We are. All right, here we go. First, I have the clips all set out. So first, I'll give you the opening minute for context.
Now to the first part of a series you'll see here every Wednesday in the month of March, focusing on men in America. The signs are everywhere. If you're a middle-aged man, you probably know a peer who has killed himself in recent years, at least one. If you're a parent, you may have noticed that your daughter's friends seem a little more on the ball than your son's. They get better grades, they smoke much less marijuana, they spend less time playing video games, they go to more prestigious colleges. If you're an employer, you may have noticed that your female employees show up on time. The young men often don't. And of course, if you live in this country, you've just seen a horrifying series of mass shootings, far more than we've ever had. Women didn't do that. In every case, the shooter was a man. Something ominous is happening to men in America. Everyone who pays attention knows that. What's odd is how rarely you hear it publicly acknowledged. Our leaders pledge to create more opportunities for women and girls, whom they imply are failing. Men don't need help.
All right. So that's just so you guys know what Tucker had in mind with this series he wants to do. Mm-hmm. I know that I actually saw, I believe it was one of those Now This style Facebook, media, I don't know if you call it political pundit spaces. They make these short little videos, and they were upset that Tucker Carlson chose National Women's Month to do this series on men.
Can we send him a gift basket? Oh my goodness, that I actually think that makes it more awesome, because I'm getting really, really tired of all of these Women's Days. They don't seem to ever end. It's going to be that, in 10 years, every single day is going to be Women's Day. And then when you say, hey, every single day is Women's Day, they'll say, but every other day is Men's Day.
Yeah.
Even though they'll have a holiday every single day of the year. Oh.
Not only is every day Men's Day, Air Day is Men's Day. But do we want to respond to any chat comments that are not super chats? If there's anything interesting, because I don't mind talking directly to the audience if they have any questions. Or should we just answer super chats, which I'm also fine with. That's usually how we do it, but.
I think that we should, if there is something interesting, but again, it's going to a little bit break the flow of the conversation. So just play it by ear. Okay. If something really interesting, do it. But otherwise, let's just keep it to the super chats.
Okay.
When it's appropriate.
All right. We're going to get on to the next clip. I thought this was kind of interesting. Because it's not quite a perspective I've heard before. So
they're the patriarchy. Yeah, actually, they're fine.
Before we get it, sorry to jump the gun here, but why don't we talk about the context of this? Because this is pretty impressive. I think everybody would agree, like people listening, you guys in the audience would agree that it's pretty great to see these issues being discussed on a fairly large network. I mean, I don't necessarily have any particular fondness for Fox or any other news network, but it's good to see that they are bringing attention to these issues, and these issues are finally starting to hit the mainstream.
Yeah.
And not just that, not just hit the mainstream in an apologetic way, but hit the mainstream in a way that's really like, why aren't we doing anything about this? Why are we just sitting on our asses about this? And I think the people in the audience could probably agree this is a really, I mean, we should take a moment and just celebrate the fact that this conversation is starting to happen. And again, not in an apologetic way, but in a way like, why aren't we dealing with this stuff way? A non-apologetic way, an assertive way. And I'm personally really glad to see it. And I have gratitude to Tucker Carlson for doing this. And I hope everybody in the audience listening to this and watching this is also like enthused about this, regardless of your political leanings. It's good to see that they're starting to get more and more eyeballs on these issues, and more people caring about them, and more people making the connection between what's happening to men and the social issues that we're facing overall in our society. So that I just wanted to give a little bit of an overall statement before we got into the specifics.
Okay.
And I'm sorry for interrupting you.
No, it's fine. It's fine. So Davey1602 says he sees our angle, but he's still skeptical. I would like to know what of. Now, I know that Fox News is considered the conservative news station, and I know there's a very good reason for it, but I'd like to know if either side, because it's almost like there isn't really a mainstream media source that isn't going to fall, on the more liberal side or the more conservative side. So if either side, I just want to say for the record, started to take interest and started to do content that started to ask the question, what is going on with men? Is there a problem? Can we identify it? And what can we do to fix it? I wouldn't care where it came from, as long as somebody was trying to do it. So I guess the question is, why does it matter if it's Tucker Carlson that's the first one to at least start to go this way in terms of mainstream media?
And I would add to that there's a lot of reason why it probably is going to be the right that at least first starts talking about this. I would also suggest that one of the real problems, I think, with the left and the right, the conservative versus the liberal viewpoint, is that both have become quite unhealthy in their approach. And for the most part, the reason why they've become unhealthy is because they have an excessive focus on wanting to benefit women. And I find that even people on the right believe in the same kind of more left-leaning, more regressive left-leaning narrative of women being oppressed by men throughout history, and there has to be reparations done. And if we got rid of that narrative from both the left and the right, I think that what we would see is a healthy conservatism and a healthy liberalism, and maybe a healthy respect between the two. Because it really, I hate to sound like a chauvinist, but it really takes a woman to get everything to break down into warring camps that can't see eye to eye, can't create a way of cooperating, can't come to any kind of agreement, and can't move forward together for the benefit of the societies that they're part of. Because the conservative opinion of how we should approach things is important. We shouldn't just willy-nilly run into new ideas without them having been reasonably vetted. And we should keep the traditions that work unless they stop working. And you need to be skeptical of change, because some changes are not productive. And yet the liberal approach is also important, because it puts the individual and the individual's needs, and it tries to make sure that the individual's needs are advocated for in a society. It isn't always about submitting the individual to the collective good, or vice versa. And so there's a balance there that I don't think is there anymore, because these ideological camps have become so entrenched in this idea that one or the other is the one that protects and provides for women. And once you get that narrative in there, that narrative that we need to make reparations for women for the oppression throughout all of human history, once you get that narrative in there, it turns everything toxic. So I think that I think it's a good thing that somebody's bringing attention to it. I think that probably would have expected it from the right, but I also think rather than seeing men's rights being co-opted by the right, I see it as men's rights is going to improve the right. It's going to make the right's argument stronger. It's going to make the right arguing about the right thing. Like, instead of arguing over which group of women is oppressed, which seems to be a big point of order in the current debate, it's going to start talking about, we have to uphold our traditions, our civilized traditions of our society, due process, rule of law, and also democracy, or the republic, representational democracy. They're going to start seeing that we actually have to put our civil institutions ahead of women sometimes. We can't just center everything around women's benefit. And I think that intersection, men's rights activism, rather than being appropriated or taken over by the right, it's going to be the reverse. Men's rights advocacy, men's rights issues are going to come into the right, and it's going to cure the right of this kind of threat narrative thinking, and it's going to create a positive conservatism. That's what I believe. Mm-hmm. So with that, do you want to go forward?
Yes, let us go forward. All right, here we go.
Okay.
Whom they imply are failing. Men don't need help. They're the patriarchy. They're fine, more than fine. But are they fine? Here are the numbers. Start with the most basic, life and death. The average American man will die 5 years before the average American woman. One of the reasons for this is addiction. Men are more than twice as likely as women to become alcoholics.
I didn't know that.
No, addiction is pretty prevalent among men. The addiction rates are very high, especially alcoholism is much higher among men, including and also hard drugs and opiates. The opiate crisis is hitting men more.
Yeah, he talks a little bit about that, the opiate crisis, and also its relationship to incarceration, which is another male problem. Go ahead.
I just had a question. I thought we were going to do the top 5 sound bites.
You want me to just jump to those? Yeah,
sure. Let's do that.
Okay. So we're going to go to the economic effects, which I thought was also kind of interesting. He talks about the education gap and stuff. These are all things that we've talked about many times, but here we go. Economic effects.
Both law and medical schools. For men, the consequences of failing in school are long-term and profound. Between 1979 and 2010, working-age men with only high school degrees saw their real hourly wages drop about 20%. Over the same period, high school-educated women saw their wages rise. The decline of the industrial economy disproportionately hurt men.
Oh, okay. Well, that's a statistic I actually that was new to me. So good on Tucker Carlson to find even more information about this situation than was apparent before.
You know what? Go ahead.
No, I want to hear what you have to say.
Well, something related to that I just got from my wife. She sent me this link like just before we started the show. And it's from Reason Magazine, and it's an article titled "The Nordic Glass Ceiling Shows How Gender Equity Suffers from Government Overreach." And it basically talks about how, in an effort to basically make their country more equal, these Nordic countries, they like Iceland, Finland, Norway, Sweden, Denmark. Okay, they have essentially made the government larger and turned them into industries of education, daycare, and to some the healthcare industry and all these other things. And a lot of women go into those industries. They're actually majority female in these government-run industries that existed specifically to give women more free time, right? So daycare industry, that kind of thing, and education. But then a lot of women went into to get jobs at those industries. And the interesting turnout is because a majority of women went into these industries in these Nordic countries, and these industries are government-run industries, there are fewer CEOs who own their own companies that are female, because the industries that women would be interested in going into are run by the government. So there are no CEOs of private colleges or either medical facilities or daycare center, whatever it is. That there are fewer women who own businesses there because they tend to take these government jobs, which were created specifically to try to make to give women more opportunities to be equal and grow. So basically, men are still making the majority of the products that people consume in these countries because they're not ones that are controlled by the state. So it's just an interesting side effect of what we're talking about, productivity, right? And if you're working for the state, you're not really creating anything new because the state services exist whether they get support or not.
Mm-hmm.
So
I apologize for my wry grin, but I'm actually not really surprised that
this happened.
I'm not that this is really advocacy for big government or even big corporation. It seems to be that this is the way it goes. I find it remarkable that I was always a liberal, and I always was involved with a lot of liberal causes, and most of the people who I was liberalizing with in the early 2000s, like the late 90s, we knew that corporate media was completely untrustworthy. And yet suddenly it's become totally trustworthy. And the other thing is that we are supporting initiatives that give corporations and government more control over individuals. The liberal initiative seems to be more about advocating for corporate and government interests now, and doing so because we've essentially been hoodwinked into thinking that corporate and government interest is synonymous with protecting and providing for minorities and women. And it's like the whole thing has been co-opted, folks.
Yep.
You're listening here at home. Yeah. The liberal cause it has been essentially, it's basically just a skin for a corporate and government, big corporate and big government at this point, and they had us. They got us good. Ha ha ha.
All right. I got some super chats, and then I'll jump to the next thing. The Beach Classical Liberal gives us $5 and says, "Why is the Tuck purple? Tuck is purple because it protects us from copyright strike. So basically, I put a color filter on there, which gives him a bit of a violet tone to his otherwise, wonderful skin. And yeah, it just changes the color, but it's basically so that we don't get struck. This is what a lot of people do so they don't have to deal with YouTube shenanigans." And then Kind Torment gives us $5 and says, "Thank you guys for what you do. I wish I could watch more live, but never works out. Listen to the archive on my drive to and from work keeps me sane." Well, thank you, Kind Torment and Beach Classical Liberal, for your kind donations. So now we will move on to the next clip.
I said kind words as well, except I was muted.
Oh, okay.
Classic.
All right, so we're going to go on to women and IQ.
By the way, the majority of managers in the workplace are now women. Women, on average, are scoring higher on IQ tests than men are.
That is definitely something I did not hear. I haven't heard anywhere. This is completely new to this particular video. And again, I applaud Tucker for having done so much research. He's actually even stumping me.
Yeah,
That's remarkable.
I'd like to know what his source is for that, because
yeah, I would too.
Not
that I think he's wrong, but I would like to know.
Yeah, I'd like to confirm it. I mean, I don't want to just go by something because it appeals to a narrative. I'd like to know, like how, like if he's accurate. But the thing is I gotta say about Tucker, I don't like a lot of the pundits on Fox News, but I do like Tucker Carlson. He seems like a reasonable guy. And there are, and I know that, Fox has a bad reputation, but you got to understand, and I had this discussion with a friend of mine years ago. He was telling me that, I was talking to him about how, I was discovering that the majority of our mainstream media has a left-wing bias. And I said, with the exception of Fox and maybe like some, independent media spaces on AM radio or whatever, maybe some local places in the US. And he was telling me that, but, his counter argument was that Fox was the most popular news station of all of the news stations. And Therefore, it makes the fact that, the other ones might be biased invalid. And I said, well, the only reason why it's the most popular is probably because if you have a left-wing bias and you want to go to a news station, you have like multiple choices. You can go to CNN, ABC, MSNBC, CBS, whatever, and you're going to go there. So individually, those are probably smaller because everyone sort of divides or fractures along those lines as to which one of those they prefer. But if you have a conservative bias and you want to watch something that's going to appeal to you, then the only option you have is Fox. So half the country, assuming that our political divides are 50-50, half the country is watching Fox News and the other half is fractured amongst the other news stations. And the other thing about the reason why I brought that up is a lot of people that work at Fox News they're not left-wing enough for mainstream stations, so they get pushed out. So it's not that everyone there is Bill O'Reilly. I think that the majority of people aren't. I think that it's just that if you're not falling in line with a MSNBC, CBS, NBC, CNN, etc., then and you want to work someplace, then you're probably going to end up getting work at Fox. For example, John Stossel works there, or he does like I think he still does, but I know he did work there. John Stossel is pretty fucking reasonable, a very reasonable guy. I think Tucker is also a very reasonable guy. So, and the fact that, again, that he's even asking these questions, regardless as to where his conclusions may take him, I think this is an enormous step forward that I would like to have seen Rachel Maddow do, but somehow I doubt that Rachel Maddow is going to do it. So, just to clarify all that.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's probably going to come from the right, and hopefully it does actually spread to the left.
Mm-hmm. You know what? Yeah, I do have one concern. My one concern is that if the right is the one that starts the conversation, the left will try to use the fact that it's a right-wing space starting the conversation to essentially dismiss the conversation. I mean, they're doing that already with Tucker now. They're saying Tucker is using Women's Month to talk about men. And there are people in the comments section doing a Rose McGowan, wah, cry some more men, wah, fuck your problems. Tucker is full of privilege, all that. So go ahead, Alison.
Just whatever.
Yeah.
Seriously, whatever. When I finish deprogramming women, everybody's going to understand why this is something that you don't need to care about. And I hope the people in the audience now, when I finish that series, you come to understand that this is both deeper and more mechanistic than you could possibly imagine. Even the people going, wah, wah, Tucker has so much privilege, you'll understand why they're doing it in the context of a systems analysis. And once it makes sense, it loses a lot of its power. And that's what I want to give to you guys. I want to make this entire juggernaut lose its power. But let's talk about Tucker right now. Let's go to the next.
All right. Well, I got to respond to something. Frank Bullitt sent us a message and he says, Honey Badger Radio, did you watch the CPAC all-female panel? The right are feminists just the same. Yes, I don't have any doubt that they're gynocentric in their own way. We know this. We know this to be true. The point is, which one right now is actually trying to have the conversation? And I think that...
And it's not the whole right. It's Tucker Carlson. Let's separate him from the politics. It's this man.
Right.
It may even be incidental that he's on the right. Well, maybe not entirely.
Well, the thing is, I don't know what that even means anymore at this point.
Yeah.
Because the people have been pushed away from the left so fervently that everybody gets called, what Kevin Logan would say, right-wing conservative. I mean, that's everybody that doesn't agree. So I don't know where Tucker stands on things. Yeah, like Eros Manger 74 says, Tucker and Stossel are different from the group on the Couch News. They can apparently be more independent. Yes, Tucker is independent.
Yes.
So why don't we find out what else he has to say? Okay, so let me jump to the next clip, which is physical issues. I thought this was kind of interesting. It's testosterone. I'm sorry. It's testosterone. This was another good one. Because this is something I've actually asked about myself. I'm going to go back a little bit. It's hard to get this point. This fucking Facebook player sucks. Okay.
American women. Perhaps most bafflingly and terrifyingly, men seem to be becoming less male fundamentally, measurably. Sperm counts, for example, across the West have plummeted. They're down almost 60% since the early 1970s. Scientists don't know why this is. Testosterone levels in men have also fallen precipitously. One study found that average levels of male testosterone dropped by 1% every year after 1987, and it's not related to age. In other words, the average 40-year-old man in 2017 would have testosterone levels 30% lower than the average 40-year-old man in 1987. There is no upside to this trend. Lower testosterone levels in men are associated with depression, lethargy, weight gain, decreased cognitive ability. Nothing like this has ever happened to a population this big.
Well, there you go. What do you think about that?
Well, I can tell. I think it's good to bring attention to it. I think that it's part of what's happening with our environment. I think that a lot of the chemicals that we use in many of our industrial processes create estrogen mimics that when they get into human beings, they start to reduce the testosterone. They start to increase the estrogen. So I think that's part of what is going on here. It might be an explanation for the lowered sperm counts and the lowered testosterone, except I'm going to immediately contradict myself to everybody listening. This effect isn't seen outside of the West. So even in I think Asia and the Middle East and Africa, this isn't happening. This reduction in testosterone and sperm count hasn't occurred. So it actually doesn't look like it's necessarily a industrial pollutant issue, because those countries are still dealing with lowered environmental protection standards. It's much more of a free-for-all in them. So the question then becomes, what's the difference between the West and Africa and the Middle East and East Asia, and Asia? What is the difference there? And what don't they have there that we have?
outside of chemtrails and fluoride in the water, and what else? A lack of super male vitality.
Is it more?
They're psychic vampires stealing the energy from the kids.
Well, they don't have as much of a narrative of their traditions being toxic, and toxic specifically because they're traditions in which men oppress women. They don't have as much of that kind of a narrative. They aren't telling their boys to take responsibility necessarily for the abuse of adult women. I mean, there's a lot less of this psychological abuse, and it is psychological abuse. It's exactly what an abuser says to their abuse victim, that they are responsible for what has happened to them. That when the abuser savagely lashes out, that they are to blame, that they have atypical, they have greater amount of blame for what occurred than the abuser. This entire narrative, this entire female victimhood narrative, is a narrative of blame towards men. And I am not surprised that we're seeing a reduction in testosterone. We could look at this less from an environmental toxin position than simply biochemistry and psychology intersecting. When you live in a state of anxiety, which you would when you feel like you're being excluded from society, which narratives like patriarchy theory, toxic masculinity, this is the kind of shit Mean Girls or a group of boys who wanted to exclude another kid, this is the kind of shit they do. This is the kind of shit bullies do. And it's being directed at all these young men and boys. So in the face of that, when you feel socially excluded, you have a feeling of anxiety, and a constant feeling of anxiety. Like you know that, especially when it's a pointed exclusion, as in the case of patriarchy theory, it's pointed. It's saying that you don't belong into the category of morality, and it's because you receive a benefit that you can't get rid of. You just passively receive something. It's not action you're taking. You just passively receive a benefit. Therefore, you don't belong in society, or your existence is actively constructing a toxic society for other people. That kind of a narrative is so exclusionary. It's so nasty. And when you break it down, all it is a bunch of kids on a playground saying, hey, you can't be in our fort. We've created this fort. No yous allowed. No boys allowed. And it's like, and that psychological experience creates a sense of anxiety. And then the anxiety itself, you have adrenal hormones, which some of the hormones that are involved in the process of creating adrenal hormones, which moderate stress, are also later on involved in creating sex hormones. So when you get people who are young men and boys who are in a constant state of anxiety, and eventually it'll follow into a depression, it robs from their sex hormones. So the simplest explanation here is we've got a narrative that excludes men from society, men and boys from society, which is creating incredible levels of stress because men and boys are social people. They're social species. We're hypersocial. The idea that we're being excluded is possibly one of the most agonizing things to experience. And so we experience this, or they experience this, all the anxiety and the pain surrounding it. And their body's attempt to maintain a homeostasis is robbing from their sex hormones, from the precursors to the sex hormones in order to create all of the hormones required to mediate all this anxiety from being socially excluded. So it's a situation where that could very well be the explanation for why testosterone is lowering, sperm count is lowering. It's simply a reaction to being excluded, and being excluded through narratives of patriarchy theory, narratives of blame, narratives of making them out to be responsible for things they can't possibly be responsible for, narratives that turn them that ostracize them based on fundamental aspects like desire, physical desire, or just being a little bit more rough or competitive.
Yeah.
It's just, and that could explain it, but I'm done here. I'm done. So we can move on.
All right. Well, a couple things I want to throw in there too, because some stuff has been going around. So soy has been like a meme lately, talking about soy boys. But I heard that soy doesn't necessarily contribute to, male low T levels. On top of that, I would like to also add single motherhood can affect men and boys chemically. So more single mothers means men I think that it can also affect their testosterone as well as their estrogen levels too. Same thing for women. It affects their because when we talk about low T levels, one thing that Tucker mentioned was that men have lower T levels, but I would guarantee you that women have lower T levels too, because women also need testosterone, right?
Oh yes, women definitely need testosterone. Women can be estrogen dominant, and it's extremely unhealthy for them as well. But let's get to the next one.
Okay, we're gonna jump to the next one. So guys, just tell me what you think about what I just said. So we're gonna go to. So he goes on to interview Jordan Peterson. Brings Jordan Peterson on for his first interviewee for his first segment on this show. He's gonna be doing one segment every Wednesday for the month of March, National Women's Month, by the way. So we're going to jump ahead to his interview with Jordan Peterson, 8 minutes and 44 seconds in. Here we are.
The fact that male behavior is often diagnosed as attention deficit disorder, for example, is a manifestation of that. The elimination of competition as a valid form of human interaction, and the failure to recognize that competitive sports, for example, are deeply cooperative in their fundamental nature, as long as everyone is playing by the rules, obviously. So
I love that, by the way. I didn't play the whole clip, but I love that he points that out, because toxic masculinity is always talking about how bad it is that men compete and dominate and all this. But the fact is that when it comes to competition, they are working within a structure of rules. And there's a lot of cooperation. There's actually more cooperation than competition. When people are, that's what the whole idea of being a good sportsman is, right? Is this idea that you're playing by the rules, and the reason why you win is because you're better and you worked at it. And it makes other people on your team better, and your opponents, it makes them better because they want to be better. This is good for everyone.
Oh yeah, and I think a bit later he starts talking about how. Let me just double check my notes because I want to make sure that I get this absolutely accurately.
Well, I can play the rest of this clip. He only goes for like 4 more seconds.
Oh yeah, let me know. I don't want to put words in his mouth, so don't.
Okay, all right, let me do that.
Well, there's that's a large part of it.
Okay, I was wrong. He just that's all he said.
Yeah.
I can go on to the next clip then. I mean,
no, but I'm glad he said it, or he pointed out that competitive sports are deeply cooperative. On they're a form of competition that is overall within a cooperative structure. So you create a cooperative structure, but within that cooperative structure, the teams are able to compete. And what was interesting is I got into an argument with a bunch of individuals on Twitter. What a shock, huh? And we ended up talking or arguing over sports leagues. And apparently the cooperation is really just written into the whole structure of the league. Each individual team, regardless if they win or not, will actually share in the overall benefit of the entire league. And I like what he's saying here, because I have said this too, that sports are inherently cooperative. They are a cooperative form of competition. They're a way of containing competition into an overall superstructure. And if you look at sports and then you look at things like Congress, you look at things like the marketplace, you'll see this repeated over and over again. That the institutions, these productive institutions, have this cooperative superstructure with competition within them. And what I've pointed out, and this is getting a little off field, is right now we're sort of deconstructing the cooperative superstructure between men. And that's not good either. And I think part of that is because we are focusing much more on the competition and making it more severe, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's a focus on doing that, especially coming from, feminists and male feminists and such, because I think they don't like the idea that because the competition exists, they want to get around it. And the thing about it is that I find interesting is there's this idea that because of a competition, we are supposed to despise losers. But I don't think that's true. I don't think that people in general, I don't think they hate losers or winners as much as they hate cheaters. I think that the people who don't play by the rules, the people who try to circumvent, the co-op, working in a team, trying to figure out what the rules are, to play within them to accomplish goals, even if the only goal is to just improve a little bit, not necessarily to win, there's a lot more respect to be gained from that than the people who try to go around all of that and basically say, well, these things shouldn't be here because I want to be included without having to work for it. I think that that's essentially a person who's trying to cheat at the game. It's my belief.
Yeah, and there's also in competitive sports, there's a lot of respect for people who just play fair and don't necessarily win, but they fight hard. Mm-hmm. So I think they're seeing a lot of things that really aren't there.
Yeah.
When they look at sports and when they look at a lot of other masculine endeavors. So let's play the next clip.
Okay, so we're at 9:17. Okay, so the next clip. Here we go.
So you're saying that there is an organized, not always explicit, but still organized attempt to de-emphasize masculinity or to punish masculinity. Why?
Because it's easy to mistake masculine competence for the tyranny that hypothetically drives the patriarchy. It's part of a ideological worldview that sees the entire history of mankind as the oppression of women by men.
Bravo. Mm-hmm. Bravo. And
it's not only an ideology that identifies and tries to see what men do as an oppressive way, but it actually tries to impose that identity on men. So it doesn't just see it that way. It also tells men that's what it is, and it tries to make them, wear it like a badge of shame, like a scarlet letter.
Yes, and let's hear a bit more.
Okay, so here we go.
which is a dreadful way of looking at the world, a very pathological way of looking at the world. It's not like men and women always get along any more than men and men get along, or women and women for that matter. But fundamentally, human history is a cooperative enterprise, and men and women have lifted themselves out of the mire over millennia in their cooperative endeavor. And to describe that as centuries of the oppression of women by men is an absolutely reprehensible ideological rewrite of history. And it's what's taught in the humanities and in much of the social sciences at universities, and increasingly in the public education system. It's taken as an unassailable fact.
And you're saying that this has...
Okay. Let's just pause there and have a little bit of a discussion.
Sure.
Okay, he's going to start talking a bit more about this and bringing up more of his ideas. But I'm really glad that we finally got onto the table questioning the narrative of oppression of women by men.
Throughout history. That women were property throughout history.
Yeah. And I'm also really, really happy about this invisible watermelon that I'm holding in my hands. I'm stoked about it. Okay, but no, seriously.
Have some of this water from here. You're making me thirsty.
This invisible watermelon later. But it's good to finally see that on the table. Like somebody putting it on the table and starting to say, no, this is just on its face wrong. And we need to stop talking about it. We need to start analyzing it, because when you look at it, when you poke at it, when you look at the things that the regressive lefts they put up and say this proves it, none of it all falls through. It all becomes meaningless. It doesn't hold together. No. So it's good to see that somebody's actually putting it on the table to question this narrative, because the truth is, it isn't just the left, the regressive left, that believes in this narrative of class warfare between men and women, with men winning somewhere in the past or somewhere around the world. It's also the right. The right has bought into it. Mm-hmm. I also call it the Church of Women Worsting, because women always have to have it worse, right? Always have to have it worse. But it's good to see that somebody's actually pulling that up, putting it out for the light of day, so that we can all start talking about it like reasonable human beings. Yeah. So let's go on to the next clip.
All right, let me just see where we're at. Okay, just a little bit longer here.
An unassailable fact.
And you're saying that this has bad consequences for the development of boys.
Well, how could you feel good about that? I mean, if you're made out to be a potential manifestation of rape culture, if you're part of toxic masculinity, if your competitive drive is regarded as part of a tyrannical impulse, if the heritage to which you belong is regarded as an oppressive patriarchy, then how in the world are you going to step forward with confidence and shoulder that what would you call it, that burden? Why would you? Why wouldn't you just step aside and retreat, which is exactly what's happening?
Wow. The last time that we covered
I could see
between Tucker and Peterson.
I could see Tucker's mind exploding right now. Like that. Well, that's just his default expression, but nonetheless,
it feels more intense, eh?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, what I wanted to point out is the last time we covered a Tucker Peterson debate or conversation, I actually criticized Peterson because it seemed like he was missing something in his analysis of boys and men's nihilism. And that it wasn't that society doesn't continue to give them responsibilities. It's that when they take up those responsibilities, society turns around and then tells them that they are beneficiaries of a system in which the people that they've took up those responsibilities for, they're actually taking something from women and girls. And I pointed out that is probably the source of the nihilism, rather than some other ideological framework. Literally, the source of the nihilism is that you're creating a situation where if men and boys do, they take responsibility, they are bad because in the process of taking responsibility, they are going to earn, they're going to create achievement, they're going to find a place in society, and then society will turn around and say, you didn't earn that place, you stole it from a woman because patriarchy gave it to you. And then, on the other hand, if they don't do anything, they're going to be blamed as lazy and useless. So it's this double bind that's leading to the nihilism, as opposed to just society not expecting responsibility for men. Society still expects responsibility for men. It's never stopped. What's the change is that now men are in a double bind where if they do take that responsibility, they don't take that responsibility, they're shit. If they do take that responsibility, they're oppressors. And a normal response to that is just to shut down and walk away. And I think the final piece has fallen into the puzzle for Jordan Peterson, and he's realized exactly, he's made the connection between those two things. And it's really good to see, because I think that again, having this out there is really important. It's really important for this to be out there and talked about. And and I think that now it also demonstrates that I think he's really backed off from his earlier stances on MGTOW.
No, he's talking about MGTOW. I mean,
he's
that's
talking
what
about MGTOW.
He is essentially sticking up for that the MGTOW philosophy.
He's explaining why it's happened, and not in terms of the MGTOW being losers, but in terms of society creating this double bind, creating this. What do you respond to? You go into a depression when you have absolutely no way. You put a rat in a cage, you electrify the cage, and you put random electric shocks through the bottom of the cage. Eventually the rat's going to just huddle in a corner, not doing anything. Yeah, this is exactly the same situation.
Despite all of his rage.
He's recognizing the problem isn't with the young men. It's with how society is structuring what it says about them and their identities. And I think that this is a very sympathetic approach to what's happening with MGTOW. It's understanding why it's happening. And that is a progression in his thinking that I think we can attribute to being exposed to MGTOW ideas and being exposed to ideas that we talk about regularly and present. So, I mean, because you can see the progression in his thinking. He starts to question this idea that MGTOW are necessarily these men who've just given up because they're weak and selfish, and starting to realize that they're actually responding to something that society is doing to men, to putting that final puzzle piece in that, oh yeah, what we're saying about men's identities and patriarchy is the most demotivating thing you could possibly say to anyone. Maybe that's where the nihilism is coming from. Okay, shall we do another clip, or
I have a super chat. I have two super chats. One just popped up. Joey Jojo gives us $5 and says, Tucker is just playing the trad thought role, pretending to care about men but really wanting men to serve women. Traditionalism is just right feminism. I don't think that's what Tucker is doing. I think that if Tucker was going to do that, he would not have brought on Jordan Peterson, and he may have argued with him a bit on the points that Jordan Peterson had just made. Tucker Carlson doesn't have a problem arguing with people. So I don't think that's the case. I think it seems to me that Tucker genuinely is interested in this topic. And by the way, I heard people talking in the comments, or I saw people in the comments mentioning that he should bring on, people like Warren Farrell or Paul Elam or something like that. My understanding is Warren Farrell is going to be on this on the last day, on the 28th. So he is bringing Warren Farrell on his show. So there is that. Now, of course, I did tweet at Tucker and I said maybe you should try to get Alison or Karen or, Hannah or somebody. Even Cassie J would be good too because of her movie. But I mean, it's just a tweet. So, but nonetheless, I think he's genuinely interested in the topic. I think he really wants to fix the problem. And I think that even if it's for TradCon reasons, I think that they have to address the issues. Otherwise, they're going to lose. At least TradCons know that men bring value at this point, even if it is something that they kind of see as a necessary evil. Alison, go ahead.
Well, the other thing I would want to say to that is I think you underestimate men's rights and men's issues. I think you definitely underestimate their ability to change people's minds and give them a structure to understand their world that creates better behavior. Essentially, I think we all underestimate. Like I said, I don't think it's the right that is going to take over men's rights or infiltrate men's rights or use it to their own end. I think it's men's rights that are going to change what we consider more conservatives for the better.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Okay.
So the other super chat is from Andel1. He gives us $5 Canadian. And he says, do you think the destruction wrought by Justin Trudeau is irreversible here in Canada? Will the universities ever swing back against regressives?
I think this is a huge topic that's probably not appropriate for a show that really isn't about it, but we can keep it in mind for a future question, or future, maybe something on HBR News.
Yeah.
Or Breaking Badger.
Pretty sure Justin's going to get voted out, guys, so don't worry.
Yeah, let's hope.
Okay. I'm pretty sure he will. All right, so moving on to the next clip. I am at 1:11:25, so we're going to jump ahead to 12:16 right here. Here we go.
Finally, if you were to give parents of boys one piece of advice for how, in their small way, they can fight against this trend for the sake of their own boys, what would it be?
Well, I would say, first of all, encourage them. And I mean that most deeply, is that to encourage someone is to instill courage in them, to support their courage. And that doesn't mean protect them from what's dangerous. It means teach them how to be competent and teach them that they can rely on themselves to prevail, even in the darkest of circumstances. That's part of it. Yes. I would say as well, more specifically, and this is specific advice for parents, if you have your children in a school and they talk about equity, and there's a class and they talk about equity, diversity, inclusivity, white privilege, systemic racism, any of that, you take your children out of the class.
I think he's missing some stuff. How about feminism? This idea that boys are beneficiaries of a system. I actually think that this is the more toxic stuff. That boys are beneficiaries of a system, passive beneficiaries of a system that gives them things that they cannot stop. This, they can't actually say, I don't want this. Like, they can't actually stop receiving this passive benefit, and yet they're being held responsible for it. It's not a behavior. I mean, it would actually be much better if feminists came out with a list of patriarchal behaviors. I mean, it would also be horrible because they do that as well. But it's psychologically much better to know, okay, I don't do this, I don't do this, I don't do this, than to feel like you should be shamed for being the passive recipient of something you can't stop. That's freaking original sin right there. You know, yep. And I'm not saying that giving them a list of behaviors that they need to avoid is better in the sense that it's good. It's just less, it's sort of like being stabbed is less potentially lethal than being shot. So I'm not saying that's good either. I'm just saying it's a bit better than saying, oh yeah, you're a passive recipient of something that you can't stop. That makes you bad. Please don't do that. And so I think that he's missing some stuff that's really toxic to boys. Yeah. And I would say, I would go further with this. I would get, if you're a parent in the audience and you're listening to this, I would give your boys a way of articulating their vulnerabilities in such a way. And this isn't about crying. This isn't about being upset. This isn't about expecting to be pampered. It's about maintaining your boundaries. And once again, I'm going to turn to Jordan Peterson in the interview with Kathy Newman. That whole thing, he's turned it around when he asserted something about his experience and made her responsible for it. You know, you've made me uncomfortable. Now he backed off of that by saying, but you know, it's what you're supposed to do. But he said it. Doesn't matter if it's what she's supposed to do. It's now in the room. It's now something that can influence her behavior, gives him a right to say what you're doing is wrong, unless it's in a particular circumstance that we both agree to. Mm-hmm. And so the idea that what I'm trying to get at is teach your boys to be able to assert their boundaries, especially with girls. Be able to say, that makes me uncomfortable. Therefore, I'm not going to associate with you, and I am not going to be responsible for how you respond to my discomfort and my decision not to associate with you. And make them be able to do that. Make them be able to say no to girls. Make them be able to recognize when girls are abusive to them and have the right to say no to that. Make them understand that this entire narrative of blame is pathological, that it is abuse, and give them the information for them to be able to work through logically how this stuff doesn't make sense. Because you can't just tell them, hey, no, this is, feminism is all wrong. Tell them the arguments, because they are going to be faced with those arguments. And they need to be armed with the logical explanation of why these arguments are wrong. And talk them through it and give them the defensive tools that they need to take back their identities, to argue successfully against the narrative that they're somehow to blame for society, and that all of women's problems, without any context to men's problems, means that they're bad people. The fact that women have problems means that they're bad people. Walk them through the arguments logically. Teach them that they do not have to abide by that they have the right to have their comfort considered. They have the right to be respected, and they have the right not to be seen as a toxin or a social contagion, and to deny these people their ability to control their identities. Teach them self-defense. Teach them self-defense against somebody who's going to try to, anyone who's going to try to control their identities for their own ends. And that's what I would say to parents. And I think if they're successful in doing that, if you're successful in teaching your sons this, they will be able to fight back against this paralyzing nihilism that society is pushing out. Because they'll be able to say, I am not defined by patriarchy myth, and I'm not defined by these allegations of toxic masculinity. I'm not defined by women's victimhood. And in fact, there's plenty of evidence to show that every single assertion of women's victimhood men face or face worse. So I'm not going to allow these assertions to make me feel like the bad guy. And I'm not going to allow them to make me feel burdened or ashamed or that I owe anyone anything. I'm going to take back my identity for myself. So this is what I would say that parents should teach their sons. Okay, stepping off the soapbox.
All right, last clip. My favorite, too.
They're not being educated, they're being indoctrinated. And there's absolutely no excuse for it.
I agree with that completely. You might run out of schools pretty quickly, though, here in this country.
That would be just fine. The sooner the better.
Jordan Peterson, it's hard to express my gratitude to you for telling the truth as you do. Thank you very much for that.
I just like that he's okay with schools suffering the consequences for indoctrination.
They shouldn't even be called schools anymore.
No, they shouldn't.
It's just nonsense. And to be honest, the more I hear about what's happening in schools, the more disgusted I am. Because it doesn't sound like schooling anymore. It sounds like abuse directed at a scapegoat group. And that always works in society. All right, I think we're
done. We just have we have a super chat. I'm gonna read a super chat, and that's it. So Polaris 589 gave us $5 and says, "What the hell are those on your face, Allison?" It's called skin.
It's called my glasses.
She could take the skin off, but I don't think you guys would like what's underneath. I mean, unless you're into anatomy.
Well, I think he's talking about my glasses personally.
Oh.
Well, anyway, me and Brian, we got to enjoy our invisible watermelon, or maybe it's
I didn't have a watermelon. I was drinking water kefir.
Water kefir.
It's good for what ails you.
Okay, well, if you enjoy this content, please do consider supporting us at www.feedthebadger.com. I want to do a shout out to everyone who does support us. They make sure that we can make this content on time nearly every day now, except for weekends. So thank you to all of our patrons and supporters in the audience. And thank you guys for listening to us. and hearing what we had to say.
All right,
So-
and tell us what you think about the
Yeah.
format. I just got a compliment on how well organized the stream was. In the live
well
chat.
organized. That's a unique compliment for us, isn't it?
That is a brand new. I don't even know what to say about it. But you know what? I'll take it.
Yeah, I'll credit it to the invisible watermelon, though.
All right, guys.
Or you can take it.
I'll do it. I'll take it. All right, so we're done. We're going to go ahead and get out of here. Thanks, guys. Leave a comment, share, subscribe. And next time, everybody hit the like button. Because I know that if enough people hit the like button, this could actually get on the trending list, theoretically. And would you rather have us on the trending list or some video about, I don't know, white nationalists arguing with fucking liberalists or
Sargon?
something?
Yeah.
Well,
It's not
I'm
that
not
bad.
pointing any fingers. I'm just saying, what
No,
would you
no,
rather
let's
have? I'm just asking. I'm just putting it out there.
Man. That's awkward. Okay.
I think that we're gonna get